Oh, good. Okay.
As you all know, for the gorge. So, and I'll sort of wrap it up here in terms of my introductory comments, but I'm a big believer. My former partner, he used to say that companies don't build buildings, people do. And I think, I would say you could extend that to neighborhoods and placemaking. And I think that was the reason why we didn't want to bring just design and real estate people to the table. We wanted to bring people that are actually making things and creating value, creating jobs, and also making special places. And I actually forgot to mention that Jasper and Ellis firm, or their company was ranked in the #1 cidery in Oregon last year. So so they were already great, but now they've been recognized for their accomplishment. So anyway, we're really excited about the people that we brought to the table. I think it's a pretty unique group that's passionate about creating a really special place here. So, Jason, you want to? I think the next one is
the next. The next question is to describe the vision real quickly, and I think you guys are asking about the public spaces. So it'll take me a few pages here. This is. For us, this is super exciting in terms of architect kind of dream project to be asked to look at this, and to, in an RFP, we get to have fun and create a vision. And this vision for us is really about a new place for the community of Troutdale. It starts with just the site, the waterfront, the riverfront there, and that water tower. And so we imagined in this iteration, we call it Park Plaza. It needs a better name, but a place for people on the water there. That was the focus and the heart of a new place here. It's a place for people, and it's connected to the river and downtown. We also think this is, should be for the people. So design-wise, this would need to be, designed with the people that use it in mind. This is one first pass at that. In this initial proposal, we envisioned a place to play, a place to meet a friend, have a meal. Maybe there's a festival going down, or maybe it's a place to launch your family bike ride from on a weekend. It's also a place to visit from afar. It's a place for new local businesses to start, to establish themselves, and it's also a home for people. We have in this plan, and you've probably seen the detail, but we have multiple housing options, townhomes and multifamily. We have 2 hotels. We have commercial industrial buildings that are intended to be really flexible and creative, allowing different things to happen. And then we have several outdoor spaces, primarily the Park Place, but many small ones that engage retail spaces for restaurants, bars, and hopefully, retail related to this great site, outdoor rec maybe, and that kind of stuff. One more slide on this. These are some of the images you saw, and I just wanted to talk about, for us, it's a full experience. So we actually, working with Chris, we're bold enough to ask the question, can we somehow find a way to work with this outlet mall and have this welcoming experience right into the site? And I think that's the first step. We want to welcome people outside Troutdale. And you can also, we've imagined a bridge from downtown across the railroad that you could walk on that's really convenient, and you can walk the nature path kind of around the front on the trail. Architecturally, we've hinted at a really warm, welcoming architecture. We think being inspired by that edge condition where this is really the city meets nature, and that's just a really special place to be. We also look to be really sustainable about development. We'd be interested in, finding ways to make it a truly sustainable, from things like making it a walkable community where you don't drive cars, to technical solutions, solar, etc. And for us, this is an initial vision. It's it starts a dialogue, and we imagine it expands with more input. And so this is our first, discussion point. And then you also see, as we talk, what you saw in the book got a little bit expanded since other people have joined us, and that's exciting. The actual question, the second part of the question was the public accessible spaces, and I'm just going to go back real quick. So the Park Plaza is the main public space. We imagine that's anything could happen there. It's connected to the new trail. We also expect around there to have wide sidewalks where retail exists, so you can have seating spell out or goods on display. The commercial industrial buildings are towards the northern part, the long, skinnier buildings. Each of those has kind of I call it a pocket plaza that allows things to happen. I think a lot of things could happen. They're going to be flexible buildings. So I imagine there'd be tastings or new gear or festivals or open houses in those buildings potentially. The multifamily housing will have some, I think, semi-public space. There's usually courtyards associated with that and stoops, and sometimes we make them more welcoming, and it sort of depends on things, but there'll be some of those. The townhomes themselves will be like a village where we imagine steps and outdoor spaces and pedestrian connections so you can walk through those spaces. And the two hotels on the water, I'm sure will have semi-public spaces where you can approach those buildings and obviously public entries. And then the last part, just making sure, working with Troutdale on streets, that the streets are really walkable and truly open spaces that invite you to walk around. I think that's there. Go to the next question. I think this is Chris's.
Yeah, I'll start this briefly. So the blue buildings are what, and the three buildings up above, and then you'll see a building that got some icons on it, and there's some blue that also represents ground floor commercial in both the hotel and multifamily buildings. And I'll hand it off to Ellen and Jasper, and then Sam to talk specifically about each area. But the brewery, Son of Man / winery, and then outdoor adventure cycling production type spaces. Those are what we call kind of maker production employment zone areas. And I don't know if Jasper, you or Ella want to talk a little bit about your vision for that area in terms of the types of folks that you see joining you there.
Yeah, I mean, I think what was most interesting to us about light industrial in this development was the combination of industrial and natural, which is so rare. Like, we feel like we have found a little bit of that in Cascade Locks, but then this space takes it to another level where you have proximity to population, people living, working, visiting. And then also, as you've mentioned, we've talked about this type of idea in Cascade Locks before, but we really appreciate this like political will and enthusiasm here to do something like this. It's just so special. You know, we're always kind of keeping our eyes open on what is available in terms of industrial space. So to have something that is near natural spaces, but also a place where you can make something, you know, high quality with integrity. Our product is made with all Oregon apples, so to be very like rooted here would be really special.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that a little bit, when we signed our lease and moved to our business, or founded our business in Cascade Locks in 2018, we were, aside from Thunder Island Brewery, which at the time was in sort of an incubator space owned by the port, we were the only other beverage producer in the town, and acted, I think, to self-promote too much, but sort of as a catalyst for like pretty significant development and investment from other producers. So since we moved in, at the time we had a winemaking subtenant who's still with us, and in the last 4 years, 3 additional winemakers have moved their businesses from Cascade Locks. 2 from the Willamette Valley, 1 from the Gorge. Freem opened up their large like wild ferment and barrel facility, a 30,000 square foot warehouse, because they saw opportunity in the community as well. Gorgeous Brewing moved into downtown again because they realized that like there was potential economic viability in the community. That being said, you know, beyond sort of personal investment, there hasn't been the same sort of like enthusiasm for trying to create a space like this out there. And I think us and the other makers they've moved into our little business park, and we're all excited about an opportunity like this that would create like a long-term home for folks with a lot of momentum from the community surrounding it.
I would just add the other unique piece of this. I know in the RFQ you talked about ownership housing, which we've addressed and we'll talk about in a bit, but Jasper and Ella would like to own their facility. And I think we're seeing more and more examples of that where the businesses want to own their real estate. And I think that's a real positive for this opportunity. Freem is another example in the Port Hood River. They're in 20,000 feet now. They started in 5. And I know from talking to their COO a few years ago, they wish they had the opportunity to own that building. They've invested an incredible amount of money in that building, but it's still owned by the Port Hood River. It was in a cellar. So that may change at some point, but I think that's a really unique opportunity in this district to promote the opportunity for business ownership, which I think aligns really well with the long-term vision of the community. I'll hand it off to Sam here in a second. If you haven't noticed this, it's not called out specifically, but we've flipped the multifamily that was on the waterfront to be along sort of the main street coming in, and have addressed and created a pretty unique concept and opportunity on the riverfront. I'll let Sam talk about. And again, sort of one of the reasons we wanted to have Sam involved is, you know, we certainly have a community of people we're involved with on the commercial tenant side, but Sam has got a much larger community that he's involved with in the food, beverage, and hospitality space. So Sam, you want to just talk a little bit about that space and the hotel idea?
Yeah, totally.
On the river?
Yeah, I'll just touch briefly on both kind of the commercial retail space and the hospitality that layers down on the waterfront. But before I do that, I just want to spend a little bit of time just kind of defining terms and also just bringing the conversation back to, I think, the really special piece about this project and this team. So, you know, coffee is our skill set. I've worked in coffee for the last 15 to 17 years, but hospitality is my passion. And as a practice, I think hospitality is some of the most important work that we can commit ourselves to as human beings. And I don't think it's reserved just for food and beverage. I think it's a practice that stretches across disciplines. And I think this project is an amazing opportunity across disciplines to basically take 18 acres to bring skilled people to the table. Great hospitality starts long before you open coffee shops. It starts with zoning and planning. It starts with urban placemaking, suburban placemaking, whatever is relevant to the market. It starts with great design and use of space. And then it layers into how you program. And like Jason said, you know, you need to come with this perspective of something being built for people, but also being operated by people, and how you recruit and how you build relationships across programming is really important. Chris and I have been friends for quite some time, as he talked about, and aside from a friendship that's been built on life and family, our work friendship has really been anchored in just a love for pursuing really great human hospitality across built environments. We did that together at Slabtown in a way that far exceeded our business relationship in a lease for 1,300 square feet. We really worked together to recruit a group of operators into that neighborhood over a period of time. So I think, you know, the requirements, and so this is what I just love about this opportunity to work on this team, because I think everyone's at the table with unique disciplines to be able to say, like, what can we build over the course of the next 10, 12 years that's an extension of what's already been going on in Troutdale, an extension of all the great things and also kind of extends that narrative. So yeah, we're blessed over the last, for me personally, working in coffee over the last 15 to 17 years in Portland specifically, and recently in Troutdale, just have a really great network of operators. And so I think, when it comes to recruiting, for the outcome, the desired outcome, we need concepts that create excellent, inspiring experiences anchored in products that celebrate craft and place. We need operators that first and foremost have an other-centered, hospitality-driven approach to hosting these experiences. We need operators who are team players and operators that have the technical know-how to create and maintain the types of experiences that we want in this area. In addition to that, I think there's a huge opportunity both in the market, the kind of the niche market that is evolving in food and beverage right now around adventure and natural environments, and the experiential retail kind of evolution that's happening in retail and consumer experiences right now, combined with this site. The Sandy River has one of the best adronomous fish runs year over year, this side of the Cascades. So we've talked about, bringing in like a fantastic fly fishing retailer that teaches steelheading classes on the Sandy. In terms of hospitality and hotels, we've already actually softly talked to a couple of best-in-class operators. In fact, one of the reasons that the site plan has been tweaked a little bit was based on feedback that we got from, a best-in-class boutique operator that are friends of ours. And there's just this amazing kind of opportunity right now in boutique hospitality. You're seeing Starwood Capital just launched a new brand of hotels called Field and Stream, which is really anchored in kind of adventure boutique hospitality. The Ace Group is building out a really interesting line of their hotel business called Ace Camp that's in the same space as well. The Ace is now our operating partner at a hotel project that we have in Portland, the Woodlark Hotel. It's a piece of their, I'm good friends with a good chunk of their management team. It's a piece of their 5-star line that they're building out. But yeah, I think ultimately, the vision for both commercial retail and hospitality starts with those core requirements. And then we just really want to recruit and layer in operators that A, are good at what they do, B, have a fantastic perspective, and C, fit the site really well. And we really need to find operators that get activity to the site. I mean, we've talked a lot about, 12, 18-hour neighborhoods. These are examples of developments that are very, very healthy, mixed use. And the way that you program retail is really important in that regard, in terms of, coffee shops process 200 to 400 tickets per day. That's people that you're bringing to a site that are making secondary purchases with other retailers that are driving business in downtown, hopefully, that are doing all of those things. So we want to find retailers that are in that kind of high traffic, high use category as well.
So this, I'll take this question. It's about the ground floor of the buildings and how they front the river, opportunities for roof decks and users. The first thing here, I have a page of Ingram Weisson's work. There's one that is in our project, but like since I started, we've developed this thing we call the first 30 feet, and we say this a lot, like the first 30 feet matters, and we have to get it right, because that's where buildings connect with people. And it's like one of the hardest problems. I think the rest of the buildings are fairly similar, but economically, design-wise, all these things that they're challenging. But they are the essence of what makes places people want to be, I think. Some of the highlights up here, the Goat Blocks is a project that we did recently in the East Side, and then just recently, Eugene Marketplace. If you've been down to Eugene, we created this covered place for retail. It's really working well. Down below, housing is a big part of our portfolio, and that's always something we're striving to create, these really walkable places where people have doors right on the street, places to interact. And you can see some of the vision in the drawings that we're doing. Quickly, on this particular vision, it's a little chopped off, but I thought I'd just walk you guys, because you were talking about the river specifically, but if we walked along from north to south, maybe you're staying at the hotel at the northern end. You walk along, you can see the two blue buildings. Point at them. These buildings, we've created little, I call them mini plazas or pocket plazas, so that these buildings, if they are wineries or making cider, there'll be opportunities to open those buildings up and maybe eat outside, have an open house. So there's some small flexible spaces. You might even see like people working out there. That would be kind of interesting visually. And then as you get further into the site, you go to the park plaza, and we imagine you can have a picnic, you could have food carts show up, you could have a festival, art festival, any kind of thing happening. And then wrapping around there is a collection of retail that would activate that with storefronts. And I'm a big fan of trying to get as many doors as developers will give me. It's always a little challenging, security and things, but we work on that. There's a little bit of live work near the water tower. That might be a really interesting thing to see people that are doing stuff that's sort of shareable and interesting. You see roll-up doors. I imagine a lot of roll-up doors are things to open up, especially on sunny days. The other part, when you get to the end, the hotel is just sort of come to life a little bit. And it's really interesting. The blue space is imagining restaurants there. We don't have any 3D, but we imagine that being a one-story element that you could get on the roof. So maybe it's a restaurant similar to the picture up there, where you can get up on the roof and see above the river. It's going to be a fantastic view, right? So you can imagine a great restaurant. The hotel is moved up there, and the little red squares are envisioned as cabin rooms. And you can see a little picture there with the lighted cabins in the tree. I think that's really interesting, that whole urban, I talk about the urban nature sort of connection. Imagine having these little cabins as part of a really lovely hotel. Maybe there's campfires in between them. You can come out, have quite the experience right on the edge of the city, looking up the gorge. And so I think obviously it transitions through the neighborhood, but currently along the riverfront, there are a variety of experiences in this current vision.
So Jason talked about our Ancrum's design approach in the first 30 feet. I'm going to talk a little bit about Capstone's approach and some of the other public-private partnerships that we've worked on, and how we've made sure that there's high quality design as part of those. The top left you see here is Cannery Square in Sherwood. This is a public-private partnership that we had with the city of Sherwood, started back in, I think, kind of 2010-ish, a little bit before that, where it included, similar to the Confluence site, a master developer overseeing the construction of offsites or street improvements and public assets, a square plaza, and then some multifamily housing units. That project built the multifamily sites on Cannery Row onto the right. We also had a public-private partnership with the city of Tigard, where we built about 160 units. In that jurisdiction, the quality materials was very important to that jurisdiction, and we made sure that we achieved that with our design. And then the final two examples is Arts Plaza that David's familiar with, the city of Gresham that'll start construction here this spring, about 100 units across the street from a public plaza. And then another one in pre-development, we're in for permit right now, is with the city of Wilsonville in the Villebois Village Towns Center. So finishing off that master plan development. And I think what's interesting, all of these except for one is centered on a public plaza, similar to the Confluence, and how we think about really building off of the public amenities when it comes to building private projects, whether or not it's the production space, the hotel, or the multifamily. We're also focused, as hopefully you can see here, using quality materials, brick, nice design, nice amount of windows, focusing on that pedestrian experience. I always call it 16, 18 feet, but maybe it's 30 feet now, I don't know.
Gotta get on the roof.
Yeah. And, in all of these, Chris and I take a lot of pride in, not only are they nice on the outside, but on the inside, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a unit in a suburban Portland area compared to a unit in a top market in the city of Portland. So for example, Slabtown or downtown Pearl District. We have the same quality of finishes. We have the same amenities in the building. So we have the exercise rooms, the public spaces to create community within the residents. So we try to really create a nice home for people to live there if they're going to rent. It's not just, it's not just kind of four walls in a bed. And then if you want to maybe switch the slide. Thanks. And then just the mix of uses. So I'll go over our program in general, but hopefully it's referenced back in our initial submittal. But we included, and you can't see it on this, but closer to I-84 is a limited service hotel with about 107 keys. Complementing that is more of a boutique hotel with 84 keys. There's a question further along about the amount of hotels and mix, and has that changed? But we think that these are kind of a different customer base that would go to these different hotels and providing opportunities for someone to recreate in the Sandy River, Troutdale area, but also have access to the gorge. The production space, where we're talking about Son of Man, good coffee, we're at about 58,000 square feet there. We've laid out the multi-family housing in the boutique hotel right now conceptually with ground floor commercial space to try to activate that so you don't have dead pockets of pedestrian zones. The multifamily, we're pushing that to get close to 160 units. Feel like that's a good amount here. We've looked at in other instances of doing more units than that. I think at some point as multifamily developers, we have to question at what point are you cannibalizing your own project and you're going to be dealing with vacancy and other issues that you're not going to be optimizing running your building. So we felt that 160 was good. And then we heard pretty loud and clear from the request that there should be homeownership opportunities. So we've programmed in here townhome units, 88 in total. I'd like to say this is really a presentation that we're giving to you, but we're not saying this is what it needs to be. We would hope that it would be a conversation with the stakeholders, the public, through the public engagement process. But this is our kind of best guess working and not being able to talk to you all about what the stakeholders in the community want. We like the product of townhomes in this area, given the compact scale, and then providing more homeownership opportunities. Next slide, please. So there was a request for a development timeline, and I put this together without having the conversation, but Marley, I think it would be great if we were selected, and Abe, Alex, all to kind of go through this together. But this was just based on our experience in other jurisdictions of how long it typically takes. So put RFP selection at 3 months, and then executing a negotiating agreement, put that at about 180 days. If we're selected, I'd love to go ahead and just start our early due diligence, which would be engaging Jason Ankrum and his team, Good Coffee, Son of Man, and really start refining the site development plan. We put public engagement throughout the whole process. I need input of what that looks like in your jurisdiction and how you want to see it be done. We've done it a variety of ways, and I'm typically the one going to the neighborhood meetings. I say, look, I'm the developer owner. I don't have the architect or the consultants, and really try to get input there. some jurisdictions, city of Tigard, it was, we did the one mandatory meeting with the city or with the public open house, and that was just kind of the process. Other ones on not public-private partnerships, I was at neighborhood association meetings. I was going to do a grocery store, and they were very particular about what brand it was going to be. So I was meeting every month with a neighborhood association. And I mean, it was really detailed. I mean, I told them what our capital stack was. They were very engaged. So it's really kind of what's the right fit. And I'd like the opportunity to be able to work on that and figure that out together. So, all that being said, we'll talk a little bit more about time equities and the access through their site. But thinking through 180 days is essentially like a due diligence, is kind of in our parlance of what that would take. And then at that point, executed DDA. I think you would want to make sure that we were seriously committed and that our underwriting made sense before executing a DDA, and gives us all the time to figure out if this makes sense. And then after that, initiating the subdivision. So I'm doing a plat right now in Salem, and I'd say that we're about in month 11 right now. So I put it at month 9 here, but in that one we have to do 70% design of the public improvements. So it's, I think there's quite some research that I need to be done and have done to figure that out, but then put in the tentative plat approval. So I think as we start to look further out past a year and a half, things become a little bit more fuzzy. And just starting, I think we wait for the plat to be approved, do the infrastructure design, and then concurrently that we could start with the phase 1 design. I think we have a slide here in a sec on, or maybe previously, on what phase 1 would be, but I think essentially phase 1 would be everything but the majority of the townhomes, if you want to think of it that way. And we can do those concurrently. We can do infrastructure design concurrent with vertical design and entitlements and going through that process. But with anything, projects need to be financed. And so we'd have to deal with that in the future to determine when to start vertical construction. Next slide. Let's see.
You want to take this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Why don't you go one more slide? So Lauren just touched on it, but we tried to illustrate clearly what we see as phase 1 and then phase 2. And phase 2 may be a couple phases, but you can see the public streets sort of shading are in the gray, sort of dotted lines or shaded lines. Other than the L that would wrap around the townhomes at the bottom, our thought is that it would be one very large initial kickoff phase. I think Sam talked a little bit about tickets. For successful retail, you need a lot of activity. And I'm a big believer in activity begets more activity. So if the 2 hotel concepts come online, we have the commercial maker district, the multifamily, the production buildings that are up on the river that have a retail interface, and some of the retail uses, the Park Plaza and the Ped Bridge. It feels like when that's all said and done, you're going to have a neighborhood. And that, we feel, is a really good preface to people that are going to want to come to the neighborhood and invest and own in a townhome, or whatever format ends up becoming the case. We do have a small amount of live-work townhomes, about 11 of them, that would go around the water tower area where the Ped Bridge line lands. So I think the blue, we feel, is a really big move, but phase 2 again would be the townhomes. Well, I'll answer the question. It'll come up later, but we would seek out another best-in-class for-sale housing developer to do that. We're not for-sale housing developers, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about as a master developer. We're laying out the commercial production district. Jasper and Ella talk about in a little bit how they see their buildings working, and they may hire their own architect, not our architect, to do that, which I think would be kind of cool if they had their own idea and design. So we're not looking to have a monolithic sort of approach to this. We want a lot of diversity in design and uses. So I think I think that creates a lot of activity day one. And then we feel that the pedestrian bridge connection to the existing downtown district is an important piece to it. I think one of the questions was what public improvements required, and do we anticipate phase one having a positive land value? We had HHPR, who does a lot of our civil engineering work, do just a really high level assessment of public infrastructure, street costs. And they came up with, assuming a 60-foot wide right-of-way with a 36-foot street with a walking path and a landscape strip on each side. They felt that the dotted gray line, this is very high level, so this is not a design level, so I hesitate to throw the number out, but I think it's important because you asked the question. They think it's probably $8.5 million to do all of the public street work that's listed. They did do it, they sent me a diagram of the existing infrastructure, sewer, water, and they said there's quite a bit of existing infrastructure there, but if you were to round up to add water and sewer and other connections, it's about $10 million for everything in the dotted gray, if you will. And that includes a 30% contingency on today's dollar. So not understanding sort of when this would happen, that's a question mark. But a year ago, I'd say that the land value that I think we would come up with would exceed that number. I think at this point, we would hope that it would about match the sales price from the land that we would offer to the city against the infrastructure cost. The valuations on investment property have dropped about 25% in the last 6 months. So how those are valued and how we look at development is something that's going to, it's still a little bit up in the air in our industry. But I think the nice thing about the timing of this is, hopefully we'll get back to a little bit more normal sense of the world, capital markets and otherwise. So that's kind of our gut check. That would not include the park plaza and the ped bridge. So we haven't taken a stab at what that might cost. So those would be sort of unfunded, but as we see it, public obligations for the public amenities. I think we just covered that. I think that the number one challenge is, in our view, to bring the vision to light is the existing access around the side and back of the outlet mall. I think we feel it's sort of suboptimal, and I think without having a new Main Street that would run through the center, I think it's going to be really hard to deliver on the quality of retail and hospitality experiences. And I would say that if that can't be accomplished, we're probably not interested in moving forward, to answer that question that was in the RFP. I think I know one of the competitors offered to do quite a bit of housing, and I don't think they relied on any access through. But to deliver on that vision and to create an experience for locals and visitors to the region that want to come to this district, and for the district to be successful, we feel like the outlet mall access is really a key point. We have not engaged with them. We know one of the teams has them listed as a team member. I'm not an outlet mall expert, but it doesn't seem that it's thriving. I think our idea here would be to figure out if there's a way to bring the outlet mall operator either into the project on some basis. We've shown, we've added some space. I think there's, along the theme of outdoor adventure, there are 20, 30 brands I can think of that are in the outdoor adventure space that are in other bigger outlet malls that could potentially be candidates for this, whether it's a North Face or an Orvis, Arc'teryx, or you can go down the list of folks. If you had a critical mass of those, I think that would add a big boost to the mall. But those groups aren't going to come unless the vision that we're creating on the waterfront comes to life. So I think there's a need for both pieces to work together. And if they're a hard stop, no, we're not interested, I think that creates an obstacle to our ability to deliver on the vision that we see for the property. So I think that's the number one challenge. Lauren, you can talk maybe about a couple of the other ones. You asked for 2 or 3 challenges that we see.
Yeah, is there another? I think really the other,
back one.
Yeah, the other challenge for us, and I mean, frankly, I think it's can be perceived as an opportunity, is you asked about the current state of the market and interest rates. I mean, the specific question was around interest rates for home ownership opportunities. I think the question may have been intended to say, what's going on in the marketplace right now, and how does that impact your willingness to move forward with this project? Yeah, I think that coming in with an RFP, and you might have heard this from your consultants, kind of at the bottom of the cycle is probably better, right? Because you're going to get more interest from parties like us that don't have a huge pipeline going in. We see real estate as a cyclical business. I mean, typically it's every 7 to 8 years. I think the last 10 years was a little bit of an anomaly. But you know, the way I think Chris alluded to it, but our industry, commercial real estate, is effectively in a recession right now. I mean, I know we haven't said larger economies in a recession, but there's very little financing available, even for best-in-class assets. You can't get financing on office, even if you have an existing asset. We have a number of buildings in downtown Portland recognizing that it's not Troutdale, but are going back to lenders, and then will be fire sold. I mean, there's just going to be a lot of things trickling down through the commercial real estate over the next couple of years that are going to impact the lending industry, the construction industry. I think it's pretty fuzzy what's going to happen right now. And, you know, Chris and I really like this opportunity as one that, you know, we're thinking that there's a patient partner in the city of Troutdale and doing what's right for the site and what's right for the community, rather than trying to belt out, you know, assets and create tax dollars as soon as possible. To the specific question on current interest rate environment impacting ownership in the housing market, I mean, you know, we're seeing interest rates go up. I think they're in the 6% range now. It's having an impact on cost of homes and values of homes. So values of homes are going down as interest rates go up to get to the same bulk number. I think what's going to be really interesting to see is what's going to be happening with rent growth and home ownership or home values in the future, because you know, throughout the Western United States and on both coasts, we're in a housing crisis. And if you limit supply and the demand's still there, it's going up and up, then that's going to have an impact on pricing. And then the question on how's your thinking on the amount and type of retail hospitality that could be successful here changed. We tried to take a longer vision to this rather than saying, look, this is something that we could put in the ground in 18 months. I mean, if you asked us, the very most important thing for you to do is put something in the ground in 18 months, we'd say, we're going to do multifamily. I mean, that's the only thing that's financeable right now, except, you know, perhaps, you know, Son of Man could probably be financed or something, or good coffee, but it's from our world, that's what it would be. So we really took a longer view than rather saying like, this is the market today and this is how we're going to move forward. And then we also wanted to have just a diverse mix of assets. Yeah, I'm not sure how much of diverse tax base would matter for the city, but that could be a benefit as well.
I think we answered this question. This is just actually a copy of the plat from Sherwood. So we created we basically subdivided the property into different chunks.
Yeah. And, you know, also just to be clear here, I mean, I think Chris mentioned it earlier, but we see ourselves as being a master developer, where we would come in and we would do a plat, get the sites ready, and then we would sell a site, for example, to Son of Man to build a production facility, or sell it to a for-sale housing developer. And then, you know, on the multifamily side, we definitely have experience there, so would likely perform that ourselves.
I'm going to jump in for
Sure.
1 second. So we have some notions about how this all is going to go down, and you guys are the first ones here, so you're the guinea pigs. So thank you. I want to make sure you guys are covering a lot of the questions that we have, but I still want to make sure that we have time to ask you guys questions too.
Okay.
So just jumping in with that comment, if my colleagues are supportive of me interrupting them. I hope you guys are, so.
We can try to go fast, yeah.
Yeah, we'll speed it up. I think we're pretty close to.
Okay.
Yeah, we're at 11:24 right now, so there's a little over half an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll, going back to the Maker Production District, I interviewed with one of your consultants, gosh, it's been over 2 years ago, with Alex, I think, and his colleagues. I think you guys interviewed a handful of other developers and market participants, but one of the precedent projects that I thought was interesting for this location and that's manifested itself in this vision is something that's like the Hood River waterfront in terms of having production maker spaces. Those tend to be more food and beverage, although Dakine was there at one point. But they also, several of them have a customer interface in a tasting room format. Some have restaurants. So that was one precedent. And when I was talking to Jasper and Ella about this idea, I mentioned a project my wife and I discovered on a long bike ride several years ago in Sebastopol called the Barlow Market District. And it's a really big, probably a couple 100,000 feet and several buildings, but it's basically a much bigger version of the Hood River waterfront. And it's all food, beverage, and sort of wine-centric stuff. There are some restaurants there, but for the most part, it's exactly what we've been talking about. So that I'll just sort of tee that up and let Jasper and Ella talk from there on how they see their space and others working in the district.
Yeah, before we get deep into that, I would just like to follow up on something Chris and Sam said earlier about their collaboration in Slabtown. And one of the reasons that Ella and I were both excited to sit down and start to talk to Chris about the Confluence opportunity is because they've done such a good job of creating spaces like this elsewhere in the region that don't feel sterile, which is something that's really easy in new development. Faceless non-regional brands can come in, poorly curated hospitality tenants, and you would get an area maybe like the South Waterfront in Portland that tons of new buildings and apartments, but it doesn't feel very vibrant. And the places that Capstone has touched and developed elsewhere, we've always felt like have integrated themselves into the city or the community in a way that feels like compelling, exciting, energetic. And so that was sort of the catalyst behind our interest in Confluence. In terms of sort of how we envision our presence in the project, our brand is based in the Gorge. So we work exclusively with Oregon farmers, one in the Willamette Valley and 3 that are in the Hood River Parkdale area. And we love the fact that the Confluence, although it's closer to Portland, closer to a large population center, is the gateway to the Gorge. You've got Sandy, you've got the Columbia, you've got, I think, millions of people over the course of a year passing through on their way to hike, bike, play in the water. And we feel that it's a good opportunity for a brand like ours that's based in the Gorge, as well as other brands like our subtenant. It's a winery called Buonanotte that sources all of their grapes from the Gorge. To really highlight not only the Gorge as a larger region, but then make Troutdale sort of like an anchor to folks' experience. And we're interested in sort of playing a similar role, planting our flag here and hopefully being a catalyst and bringing other folks along with us. I think we had a conversation, I know Chris had a conversation with the folks at Wayfinder, and we have a good relationship with them. They sell our cider. Talked about trying to collaborate in a larger maker space where we might have multiple suites in a building that we own that house a winemaker, Wayfinder, to create sort of like this vibrant commercial district that provides value to the homeowners that are in other parts of the Confluence project.
Yeah, I think one other element that's really important to us that you can see in some of these inspiration images is kind of creating a space where we can be making that also is highly visible, that production. So the shed in Healdsburg is a great example where it's really an industrial building, but there's just this element of transparency where people can feel like they're experiencing us making what we make without, necessarily having like a full brew pub operation. So that was an element that we thought was really important. And then we're also interested in having an like a customer facing hospitality element that's like smaller in scale, potentially in those like mini parklets, whether it's food trucks or something similar. Yeah.
We've talked to folks like Grasslands Barbecue that's currently in the Hood River waterfront, Ryan and Emily who own Sugar Pine about ways to collaborate that would activate our space, create additional hospitality away from sort of that main restaurant row. Without necessarily competing, it could be seasonal, it could be summertime, something that just like auxiliary component that spreads the burden and activates sort of the whole development area.
I think we covered most of the hospitality. I think that maybe just to put a little bit of another spotlight on this idea of it is to have about an 84 key, more traditional hotel structure, but then to have these extra cabins. And then Sam had a conversation with one of the operators about, is a cabin a good idea or not?
Yeah, and I would just follow up on the hospitality section in your questions. If you want more detail, I think, boutique somewhere between, I would say 3.5 and 4.5 stars. So nice, and really speaking to that kind of luxury traveler that wants to adventure, but doesn't want to rent a campsite.
There's a good example. Jason put a picture in for the Society Hotel in Midgeon, which, they renovated an old school building, which is a neat adaptive reuse, but then they have a ring of cabin-like structures that go around a spa in the middle, and it's become a very popular place for folks that are going out to wine taste and recreate in the gorge, and then it's a great place to stay over, want to spend the night in the gorge. No reason why that couldn't be right here. Go to the next one.
No, we would not be willing to consider a long-term ground lease. We've done ground leases before, and I've done several with the Port of Portland. Our experience is that in order for a ground lease to be successful, it needs to be in a major market. And in our experience, that would preclude Troutdale. What happens with a ground lease is the valuation just gets knocked in all levels. So the valuation of the land would go down, the value of your buildings would go down because of the impact of the ground lease, because it's not as financeable.
And the port ones were required by the FAA, so there was a constraint there, and it's pretty conventional to do ground leases on port industrial property throughout the country. If that was a condition or requirement, we'd probably say that somebody else could do that. It's hard enough to get them done without ground leases, as Lauren said. So.
And then I think I covered the public engagement strategy earlier. I think what's unique about Capstone is, it's us, it's me and Chris, and there's an asset manager who we work with who manages all of our assets. But what you see is what you get, and we're going to be there, talking to the public and outreaching to stakeholders, elected staff. And then, again, we haven't done business in the city of Troutdale, so I think that I would want to talk with stakeholders, business owners, to really figure out what would be an appropriate strategy before proposing something.
Yeah, I think that's really an important point. We're mostly from Portland, and we've experienced in other outlying suburban communities, sometimes I think people coming in from the big cities, telling them what to do, and we really shy away from situations where we don't want to be the bad guy or gal. We really want to be a partner, and I think that's really, is it kind of going back to the beginning, the people quotient. We really see ourselves more as your partner and not, quote unquote, the developer, and trying to figure out, finding the truth on what's the right balance of your vision and our vision. You asked us for a vision, we're sharing one, but as Lauren said, it's not a hard and fast vision, and so hopefully through a collaborative process, we'd find that vision together. And we're celebrating our 21st year in business this summer. So we've been around for a long time, plan to be around for a lot longer. And we're focused just in this metro area. We have a Seattle office that focuses in the Seattle area, but we pretty much stay within an hour of where we office. And that's on purpose. I think we can do a better job if we're focused on the few projects that we work in. We're not a big team, as Lauren pointed out. So when we looked at responding to this, we really wanted to think about, do we have the capacity and the interest to focus on this? Because we're not going to do 5 or 6 projects. We're going to do 1 or 2 a year. So that I think that says something about our commitment to wanting to work with you guys.
And then after this, we had a couple of questions. Sorry, these are the team specific questions.
Yeah,
I can, this maybe is the last one, I think, and then we can bounce. So there was a question, I think, have we done something similar with another adjacent property owner? And it's kind of a garbled slide here, but in the upper right is an aerial of over 100 acres right in the center of Reno. When I was at Trammell Crow many years ago, we had about 50 acres under contract. The seller was the Sierra Pacific Power Company, but the entire piece of property was flood prone and undevelopable. We were the 3rd developer in fact, the power company themselves tried to form a flood district, but the city of Reno had a requirement that 100% of the adjoining property owners had to be willing to join a flood district because it encumbered them with a 20-year tax liability to finance the flood improvements. So we were kind of the 3rd group in, and while it wasn't an easement through an existing outlet mall, it took about a year and a half, and I pretty much led that effort, was to get 18 individual property owners to join in on an assessment district, which hadn't happened before. And it opened up the development of that 50-acre site, which included a Target and about 500,000 square feet of office space and a bunch of industrial space. There was about 2 million square feet of industrial, office, and retail space that basically came to fruition after that effort. Because the city, in some cases, cities in the city of Portland, they won't necessarily require 100% participation for the council to move forward with a local improvement districts, what they're called here. In Reno, they call them special assessment districts. So we did 2 special assessment districts. The big one was for the flood, because the flood, nothing was going to get built without the flood district. And then we also did a separate single party special assessment district for all the roads and improvements that served our project 100%. So that's the closest I could think of an example. Like, this is a pretty unique animal you got. So. I don't know if we have, I think we kind of touched on all of that. I think we really, as Lauren said, we really prioritized the multifamily, and going back to Sam's comment, activating the district and getting people there, not just people that are working during the day, but that are living there, but also visitors coming to experience this area is going to be really important to driving that area as a viable destination to support the retail.
And we had a couple of questions for the panel, but would you all like to ask us questions first, or how would you like to handle the rest of the time?
Yeah, I think that's what I would suggest that we do. We had some scripted questions. We covered a lot of it, maybe all of it. So I would just sort of, maybe if the panel's okay, kind of moving away from our script and then jumping in with the questions that we might have. I think, Abe, you look like you might, I can jump in with a question, but.
Yeah, go ahead,
Do we all feel like our questions were answered?
Well, I think that's the question, Jordan, is to go through it, and if you don't think they're answered, please jump in. I think some of them are, I think to my sense, they've all been kind of addressed. Some might require a little bit more detail, a little bit more meat on the bones, if you will. So I would encourage you to jump in that way.
Yeah. I'm happy to throw one out just to get started. Yeah. So first, it was an incredible presentation. Very much appreciated the richness, the breadth, the depth. So put a lot of work into this, and I'm expect to be commended for that, as well as the success of the projects that you've done individually and Chris and Lynn. Sorry, I know all of them too, so. As you get older, Lorraine, but for quite a while. So public infrastructure is incredibly important for this. You've thrown out a number which is actually ironically fairly consistent with some preliminary work the city has done. The city has currently limited TIF ability. So what kind of creative infrastructure financing would you suggest, or what have you done elsewhere that's worked?
In Sherwood, they use Build America bonds. So I don't know that those are available in the current infrastructure bill. I did touch on in Reno, the single party special assessment district. I did a local improvement district when I was at Trammell Crow in Tualatin a long time ago. It was just for roads in the city of Tualatin. That's certainly, I don't know if the city has an ordinance that allows you to do that. That's certainly one way to do that. I mean, it all kind of goes to ultimate valuation of the property, but there may be a way. In the city of Portland, they batch them all up, and you get the full faith and credit of the city of Portland's bond rating. In Reno, the special assessment districts for single parties weren't. You didn't get the full faith and credit. The rates were still pretty good. And in the case when we did that, Target, we sold them a pad, and we sold, at the time there was a Mervyn's is no longer, but Mervyn's and Target both did stores there, and they elected to prepay their assessment. They didn't want to have a legacy payment assessment tied to the special assessment district. On the office park and the industrial park, we felt like our obligation for the servicing of those bonds was comfortable within the market for operating expenses. That was the case in Tualatin too. I mean, the operating expenses reflect that pass through on top of taxes. So you got to really make sure that you're not spending too much. I mean, on the multifamily, it would have a bigger impact on the operating expenses. So that impacts land value.
One other example in the city of Salem, and they did this with the Mill Creek Industrial Park, is, and I can't remember how many acres it is, close to 700 or so acres, but they said, we're not going to assess you a system development charge for work here, but it's going to be called a DDF, development, basically a system development charge, but it's based on per square foot. So I think last time, and it just with inflation, it's like $2.90 a square foot, but all of that money sits in a fund, and when as infrastructure is built with vertical development, then that gets used on the infrastructure. Sometimes it's a combo of those funds with private developer funds.
Yeah, thanks. It would be a partnership. We'd have to figure out ways to do this. So
yeah,
but I'm glad to have the chance experiences.
Go ahead.
Okay, you talked a lot about selling. By the way, excellent presentation. Thank you all so much for being here today. You talked a lot about selling off pads and things, and you're the master developer, and one thing that you kind of lose when you sell something off is you lose some control a little bit over how that ends up. So how would you assure that this is all going to work out collectively the way we envision it?
Well, I mean, I think one example could be codifying certain ground floor development standards. So having requirements for glazing or frontage or active uses. Then we've also been involved in Northwest Portland, a larger master plan area where you have a master plan on the entire site, and you need to develop to that plan. Now you lose some individual entitlement rights when each thing comes up, but it's master planned. I mean, those are all from a regulatory perspective, how you could manage that. I'm sure there's other ways that staff could come up with. From the private side, I think I'm not sure if there is necessarily a way to do that, to mandate design from a transaction side, unless something was on title. you could have an agreement put on title.
I think in Sherwood, there was a pattern book. And I don't remember, I think either the city had a pattern book or we worked, Ankrum and Capstone worked with the city on, but it effectively created a pretty high level of design control to address that question. I don't remember who owned it, it's been a while. But I think, we're comfortable with that. In other jurisdictions, we've done plan unit developments where we effectively negotiated the design standards for the specific property, sort of like Lauren was saying with a master plan. So I think we're open to doing that. I mean, we're not parachuting in and then leaving. I'm going to be driving by this site as long as I'm alive. So I think it's really important to us to have this be a legacy that not only you're proud of, but I want to be proud of it, and my kids be proud of it, and have visitors come and say, wow, this is a pretty special place. So it's a really good question, and we take that responsibility really seriously. And so we're happy to be partner with you to figure out how do we get to that place where whether we're developing it and executing it, or bringing in, say, a hospitality developer that has their brand and wants to do they have sometimes they have their own design criteria, but oftentimes larger brands will adapt based on the requirements that are in place. My wife and I travel all over, been to a lot of sort of gateway areas to national parks, and you can see sometimes there are better controls than others on what they ask of limited service hotels, as a great example, right? So I think there's a way to really do this right in a way that's not going to constrain our ability to come up with the right operators, but in a way that the end result will be of high quality.
Recently we did a framework plan for Beaverton down by the Round. There's a new development that includes a concert hall. We did housing with Rimbold, and we developed guidelines in particular about the ground level. So if you go visit there, you'll see everything really working hard to create these kind of streets I talked about. That ended up being working for Beaverton, not the developer, but it's interesting how they happen. We start to just try to find who's interested, and we really appreciate those kind of guidelines that are flexible but have principles that drive that to happen. I don't think it's really difficult to create myself. Implementing is a different thing in negotiating, but you can look at that example of what we've done.
So,
Go ahead.
just echoing with Tanny, that is going to be a big concern for the citizens of Troutdale. Question about hospitality hotel. We have been, as we've been talking through this, our consultants have been telling us that is one thing that may be difficult to be financed in this market. And the Town Center Advisory Board, though, that is one thing we're very excited about, being a destination point with hospitality and tourism and gateway to the gorge and all that. But listening check of what you guys were presented today is that was phase one. But yet our consultants are telling us this may be something that may be pushed off. So can you elaborate, because what you're telling us versus what our consultants are telling us may be contradictory?
I think I'd answer maybe we see it differently, but maybe not. Lauren touched on the dislocation in the current market for our business in general. If you said, we want you to deliver a building next year, we're going to award this, and you need to get the first multifamily project in or the first hospitality, but we'd tell you it's not going to happen. In our mind, you might be able to get it done, but I think we're sort of looking forward and saying, we think if it takes 18 months to 3 years to get through this sort of process, we're assuming construction costs will stabilize. Maybe they'll come down. We started to see construction costs come down a little bit. Rents continue to seem to be moving up. It's just the equity and debt capital in the market is trying to figure out what's the right price. And that's impacting values in this period of time. I think we're hopeful that next year there's going to be, it's not going to be like it was a couple years ago, but if there's more predictability and stability, I think the market will respond to that. There's a lot of capital out there. It's just trying to figure out how to price itself. And everything we talked about, whether it's hospitality, multifamily, townhomes, it's all going to be dependent upon, if Jasper and Ella wanted to get an SBA loan, it's going to be a different rate than it would have been last year. So everybody that has an interest in this project would have a hard time getting it done today. And that's not to say there's no way it would get done. It's just going to be really difficult. So I think I think that's another really important question for you to think about with your selection of your partner is, I mean, and actually this happened in Sherwood. You know, we got selected, we had several meetings with, at that time it was the mayor, the city manager, they had an economic development director. We had a great plan, and then the Great Recession hit. So, you know, we had to put the whole thing on hold for a couple years. And then it came back, and we were still there. So, I mean, I think that could happen. You know, it could get worse. Lauren mentioned we're in a real estate recession right now. Most of the brokers that sell commercial property would say we're in the middle of a recession. And we've heard from multiple intermediaries that multifamily in particular, the values are down 20 to 25% from over a year plus ago. So, you know, we do business with US Bank, Wells Fargo. In terms of the larger commercial banks, most of them are on hold right now. And it doesn't matter what you're trying to get a loan for, whether it's industrial, apartments, hospitality. So it's be a tough time. So that's why Lauren was talking about how we think the timing of this, if you have the patience to sort of wait for the right vision and execute it right, we might say to you, we get through the idea of what the plan is together. We might say, well, now's not a right time to go. And I think that's just something that everybody needs to have their eyes wide open about.
So you had mentioned your number one challenge with this is the mall. I think many people in the room would say that's right up there. So how would you approach time equities? What would you do to incentivize them to play with all of this?
You know, I think that's a hard question to answer other than that. I mean, I think that if they have a need or an interest in seeing their center be long-term sustainable, I mean, they have quite a bit of vacancy there right now. And I don't know why that is. I have my own opinion about why that might be. I mean, a lot of the outlet malls tend to be much bigger and have more brands represented. So I'm only speculating, but if our vision's compelling and is going to drive a lot of economic value to that area, and an enlightened owner operator of a center sees the potential to benefit from that, they're either going to, I think, see the benefit of participating or not. And if the door stays shut, then the door stays shut. I mean, I did see on one plan they're allowing one competitor to, or at least they show a pedestrian walkway going through the middle. I don't know what that really accomplishes personally in terms of bringing visitors. I mean, maybe people could walk from, you know, the Columbia store down to the waterfront, but I just don't see our vision working with a pedestrian only access personally. I think walking around or driving around, it becomes too car dependent, and the sense of arrival is just underwhelming. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Dave. It's a little bit of trying to assess motivation and trying to figure out, okay, is there a win-win here? And I can't predict what that'll look like.
So if you were to be successful and you were able to make them to be interested, if they wanted to partner with you with all the building Confluence and big improvements through mall, is that something you might be interested in?
Sure.
Holding to it?
Yeah, no, I think we might have even mentioned that in our first response. You know, this is way too early for us to identify who our equity partner would be, and it may be multiple equity partners depending upon different pieces. They're a really big operator, owner, investor throughout the country. One of the brokers we do a lot of work with at Urban Works, Brian Greeley, represented Starbucks on that lease. The person that was on the other side is probably not the decision maker on would they grant access or not. But Brian is a very skilled broker. He worked for C.E. John on the development side. He's negotiated grocery store deals. So he's a broker that we would, you know, consider bringing to the table on our project to work with this team, because we're going to want to beat the bushes and get the best people to this project, and that may be greater than this team at the table. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's a big question mark that we'd like to run to ground fast.
I just wanted to make everyone aware that there's about 7 minutes left in our allotted time. You know, we're okay going over a little bit if you guys have the flexibility in your schedule, but I wanted to make sure that you guys have the time to ask your questions. I know David and Randy, did you have anything quick before we move on to theirs?
The majority of my questions were answered in your presentation, so I think I'm comfortable with moving forward to hear what their questions are.
Yeah, real quickly, Lauren, just make sure I got the math right. So 160 units, multifamily plus 88 townhomes?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted, and
Actually, now we're down to 70 townhomes.
Okay.
87?
The first plan had more. I think we have 11 in the first phase and 59 in the second phase. Right.
And
So-
I think,
We didn't rejigger all of it. It's pretty close to 70. It went down
Okay,
some.
so 160, and we'll call it 70 townhomes. Okay.
Is that including those live work units?
Mhm.
Okay.
I think there's a bit of, the parking is hard to juggle around a bit, so I think we'll probably go beyond that if we can.
And I guess my other question, or more of a statement, is like putting on the urban design and planning hat from past life. When the market's kind of slow, is the time that is to think creative and to think big. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what I heard Lauren say is if we had to build something today, we would build multifamily. But what you've shown is a full range of uses and things like that. So I'm hoping there's a question here, but can you maybe just elaborate on the philosophy of how we deal with this time of uncertainty?
Yeah, I think my comment was more directed on the challenge with the capital markets and that development in large part is not financeable right now. And so I think that in this time of uncertainty, I think it's a great opportunity to have the conversations with time equities, to come up with a site development plan, to have the public engagement, to work and partner with staff on design elements. I think we're committed with Incrum as a partner to really emphasize the first 30 feet. It sounds like that's of interest to the panel as well. So how can we come up with design guidelines that make sense? So I think it's really an opportunity time rather than trying to rush into something to meet the cycle because the financing's available.
Thank you. All right, you guys have.
Do you want to, Lauren? I think we have.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of broad, around community engagement and what would that look like from your perspective, timing around the waterfront project, the trail, and then your next steps for selecting a developer and timeline, and then finally relocation incentives.
And that was a specific question that I asked everybody, and Jasper and Ella were curious as a business looking to relocate to this area. What, Marley, you probably best answer that question. But
I was going to comment on the first question. Is there a process to continue with community engagement? I think your timeline, even though you stated it was kind of generic, just because we weren't really sure, when everything's going to start happening. But I think you nailed it right on the head. The community engagement piece is spread out through the entirety of the project. And I think that's something that the Troutdale community really appreciates and really notices when that community engagement is lacking. There's some developments that we've had around the city where community engagement was completely lacking. And so it's felt and it's felt when it's not there. So I think, again, you just nailed it right on the head, just making sure that we're working as partners and we're listening and we're cooperating and just making sure that the community is involved in that, even in every aspect. And then we on council and our community committees will shoulder a lot of that as well. So
thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to that working with the Town Center Advisory Board, which is the board that's been put in place and has vetted all these questions and conversations, will be critically important moving forward. They will have an important role in this whole process, in addition to the larger outreach to the community.
Yeah, and I would continue. There's so many different boards and commissions within, whether it's planning or it's public safety or it's parks, or continue to seek out, if you're chosen for this process, to seek out all the information you can.
Thanks.
And I would just say, when we did the town center plan, we had a number of community engagement sessions. And the interest was all about that site. And so the community was really involved and wanted to know what was going on, and we are committed to keeping that process going.
To that point, was the plan, the sort of conceptual master plan in the RFQ itself, was that one that was arrived at with input?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, it's a great starting point for the architect. It gave us, we feel proud of what we did, but that actually gave a strong backing to ideas that we were creating. So really thought you guys did great work on that.
Yeah, we were proud of what we came up with, and there's a lot of hard work and a lot of time and sweat that went into that document. So
yeah.
It makes us very happy that you read it.
Thank you.
Timing of the waterfront project, I should be able to do this in the back of my hand, but we are in the process of, it's a process, right? So we're working with the railroads now to make sure that we can make the connection. All those things are looking very positive and moving forward. I believe it's before council this evening to approve funding for that. I don't have a specific date when groundbreaking would be. Everything is moving forward in terms of making that waterfront park happening, if that's what you're talking about. And I can get back with better information.
Okay.
Yep.
I can elaborate
Thank you.
a little bit more on that. So we did receive Metro funding, some grant money from Metro, about $1.9 million to construct trail. Then we also received grant funding from Oregon State Parks, and so I think what's on the council agenda is specifically to accept that grant money. We have to sign an IGA with those organizations in order to accept their money. So that's what's in there. The rest of the financial requirement for that would be coming out of the TIF funding that we already have, and the urban renewal budget. And in terms of process, we want to make sure that we know who's selected as a development partner, because there's some railroad requirements that involve connections with what your design would be and the way that they can access the bridge and the underpass and whatnot. And so we don't want to design something from our landscape architects that isn't complementing what you guys would want to design. And so we don't want to move it too far into the process with the railroad, and then they're like, okay, these are the exact designs that are approved, and then it doesn't complement what you're doing. So we're waiting to have those like joint meetings together so that there's collaboration and there's not any differing of opinions or designs happening. But everything is pointing in the right direction.
Yes.
Good.
Do those funds expire at a certain point? Does construction have to start on the waterfront project?
That's a good question.
I don't think they expire. I mean, another thing you can check on. I mean, it's early enough in the process that, given the process you're all talking about, I think they will align.
That'd be a great question for our finance director though too, because he's looked at the fine details of that, so we can ask him for clarification.
So I'll take a stab at Marley, help me out. So the next step in the process is, you guys were first. We have 2 more interviews later this week. Then the Town Center Advisory Board will convene, and what they will ultimately do is put forth a ranking, if you will, of here's what we thought. That'll be brought to City Council. I think we have a date of,
I remember it's March.
And at that point, mayor and council will decide if they have enough information to move forward. They might have additional questions, send staff back. So,
URA.
Oh, excuse me, thank you. It goes to the Urban Renewal Agency. Thank you. So, I mean, I would imagine we would love to, we would be advancing our ranking in March, and then, once we do that and accept it by council, then we enter into the DNA with the selected firm.
Okay,
Yeah,
Talk about relocation and some things.
please.
So currently the city has a program in place, it's an SDC subsidy program for new restaurants or expanding restaurants. So like the eating and drinking establishment part of your business would potentially qualify for that. Council is reevaluating it and gonna have to determine whether they want to extend it into the future, because it's set to end before you guys would be able to develop anything. But they'll be discussing that and determining whether they want to extend it or if they want to do any other sort of incentive programs. Beaverton and Gresham both have different storefront tenant improvement programs or different grant programs. And so we're going to be sort of proposing a number of different options to council to see what incentive programs they want to develop or establish, or if we just want to keep the existing ones that we have. But we found that the sewer SDCs are one of the more expensive costs that new restaurants would have when wanting to come to town. So that was the incentive that was currently created. But, yeah. Evaluating lots of different options.
I would say that you're not going to have a restaurant. So
Yeah.
If there is a, speaking not just for but for other maker types, I think that the storefront grants, any kinds of potential fee waivers that relate to an employment use would probably be maybe more valuable.
So
Yeah, that's something we've taken advantage of in the gorge a little bit too, that's sunsetting soon.
Yeah, we took advantage of a property tax abatement through economic development zone that was valuable for us in the first few years of our business.
Yeah, if it's just an equation of like just moving all of the tanks and all that good stuff.
And I think it's relevant because in part what Chris and Sam talked about, in order to have vibrant regional businesses, oftentimes you're not leaning on huge corporations to come in that have massive budgets to, open up a new facility or whatever. And for smaller, medium-sized businesses, moving all of your infrastructure from point A to point B is not an insignificant cost.
Yeah, so you guys would just be looking at having the cider operations then and not do it. Would you have a?
I think our goal would be, it would be primarily a production space. We would like to, currently, we take advantage of tasting room license for the LCC to do events, public events and things throughout the year. And we'd like to continue to do that, but we don't necessarily have plans to have like a full-fledged restaurant or tasting room on site. Okay. And more about opportunities throughout the calendar to open up, bring people in, or collaborate with another hospitality company to do something maybe seasonally, have a food cart outside or an existing restaurant that could set up a kind of a satellite space.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's super helpful to understand because, they are going to be evaluating this program in the next couple of months and sort of establishing whether or not there's other incentive programs that would make more sense or would benefit this development or other developments in the downtown area. So it's helpful to know what, based on what we're looking to see, what we would need to do to make some of those things.
Marley, I would just suggest, I think there's been a verbalized desire from council to see ownership. And I'm a big believer in ownership. I mean, to circle back to Tanya's question about how do you keep someone from just building product that we're not proud of and operating in a way that just is where it's operated poorly. And there's regulatory ways, but I think there's also what we always look at when we go and look at ground floor space. We meet with lots of developers every calendar year looking for new locations, and I look for operators. I look for people that are best in class at building and owning. And I think, as you guys consider kind of new incentives, I would just consider ways that you can incentivize ownership. I think the sewer subsidies program is great, but it's really built out on kind of a tenant rent structure to incentivize food and beverage in the commercial district. And I think it's a great opportunity to explore, like, if we want commercial tenants to buy property and to invest in this area for the next 20, 30, 40 years, how do we find some unique ways to incentivize that?
Okay, this staff, consultants, mayor, you guys have any further questions or comments? You guys,
I think we're good.
all right.
I'll say thank you for being flexible with your schedules.
Yeah,
Likewise.
It was, last week was interesting, so.
Yeah.
I'll say it was a very professional presentation. It was great interaction, and thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.